welcome to the online workshop at the Academic Writing Center. I'm happy to introduce our today's speaker, Ekaterina Redkina. Ekaterina is a psychologist and an English teacher with more than 10 years of experience. She holds a number of international certificates and is a Fulbright scholar. And we're also pleased to say that she is a frequent speaker at our center. Ekaterina, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you for finding time to be here today. So today we talk about modifiers, misplaced, dangling, and actually squinting as well, modifiers. Of course, we focus on academic writing, but we'll also have lots of examples from more general context, because I think this will help you to understand how it works. I'll give you time and opportunity to write yourself. There will be lots of correction exercises, correct the mistakes exercises, and you will be writing yourself as well. So as for me, yeah, I'm originally a psychologist. That's my first education. I've always been working as an English teacher. Now I'm working at Moscow Pedagogical State University at the Institute of International Education, where I give lectures on English teaching methodology. And I also teach English there, and I have different students, teenagers, adults. And I work, over the years, I've been working a lot with psychologists. So as you can imagine, I deal a lot with academic writing and also speaking in academic contexts. And so generally academic writing is very interesting for me. The plan for today will be the following. First of all, we'll talk about three main types of errors with modifiers. So there could be more. In different literature, you can find another type, which is called interrupted or interrupting modifiers, but it often goes within the other three. So three main types. We'll talk about misplaced modifiers. So we'll define that. You'll actually define that. You will, from examples, you will understand what it means, and we'll practice correcting it. Then we'll have similar practice with dangling modifiers, squinting modifiers, and then we'll have some writing practice from you. So let us start. We'll start with the definition of a modifier in general, just to make sure that we're on the same page, okay? Modifier can be just one word, it can be a phrase, it can be a clause as well. The main function of any modifier is to describe or somehow define, qualify something else in a sentence. They can modify a verb, they can modify a noun, for example. And the whole idea of a modifier that it belongs to this word and they should be very closely connected. Why do we use them? Because we could have avoided them easily, right? But we use modifiers to make your writing more, well, memorable, maybe clear, maybe vivid. Well, maybe not an academic, but well, it depends, right, on what we talk about. Obviously, it helps to make your writing less vague and clearer. And modifiers, as I said, can be different parts of speech and can be different words or longer constructions. So in these sentences, modifiers are just adjectives or adverbs. So here are two sentences here. Which word in the first sentence would be a modifier? Obviously, that's an adverb. Always can also be a modifier. It's a manner, right? Like how often we do something, we listen. How often? Always. This can also be considered a modifier, right? In different literature, again, you might see that this topic goes under the umbrella term of adverbs or adjectives, right? Or clauses. But anyway, it still falls under the modifier section. Okay, so if you find it in literature, well, maybe under a different name, it's also fine. Then modifiers can be longer phrases or clauses. So again, there are two sentences here where the colorful pictures were placed. Actually, that's the whole part would be a modifier. And in the second one, what would be a modifier? Having finished with data analysis, right? So as you see, longer phrases or clauses are also modifying something. All these sentences I've just shown, they are okay, they're correct, okay? So we often have mistakes in modifiers, but these particular phrases, they were fine. Let's look at some phrases that are not as good as the previous ones. And I want you to find modifiers now that refer to the underlined words in a sentence. So in the first sentence, you see the word chatted, yeah, the minister chatted. What would be a modifier? Maybe the one, or maybe several, that would refer to these underlined word. He chatted about cost of living with several women, right? What about modifier in the second sentence? Yes, crying on the examination table. And in the last one, dressed in a tuxedo. So what do we see? We see that modifiers exist and that they are in the sentence, but they are far away from a word that they modify, right? These all three sentences, do they seem all right to you? Yeah, well, the first one, actually, it's a little bit funny. If you think about it more, Minister chatted informally about the cost of living with several women. It looks like he was living with several women, which obviously is not the case, right? Because he probably was talking to several women. So the first one might look okay, unless you start thinking about the meaning, and it looks actually funny and ridiculous. Number 2 and 3 are just weird, because sometimes you don't even understand what's happening, right? What does it mean? Yeah, so I've highlighted modifiers for you. And the question is that some modifiers in the sentences are correct, others are not. So let's look in the first sentence. The word informally, would it be a correct modifier? Is it in the place where it should be? So informally, it characterizes the verb, adverb near the verb, it's all fine. Then this phrase, we actually talked, well, we've mentioned it already, but once again, living with or just with several women. It's not in the right place, sounds strange. So this is a wrong one. About the second sentence, crying on the examination table, is it in its correct place? No, because it refers to the child and it's very far away, right, from the word child. So this one is wrong. The word small, is it, because it's also technically a modifier, is it in its right position? Yes, of course, yeah, classical, right, adjective, noun, no problem here. This one is okay. Dressed in a tuxedo, we want to say that the head of the chair was in a tuxedo. Maybe all other people were wearing suits or dresses or whatever, right? So this one is wrong as well. So what we see that some modifiers are in correct places, others are not. Let's think about modifiers that are in a wrong place. 3 of those. How would you call a modifier that is in the wrong place in a sentence? This is a misplaced modifier, and I've picked these pictures for you. I will be using them during the presentation just to make it more metaphorical and visual. So by the end, you will have these pictures in your mind and remember these 3 different types of modifiers. So misplaced, it's when everything is correct, but just somewhere in the wrong place, right? Any ideas, like how do we correct a misplaced modifier? What's the main strategy? Just moving along the sentence. Usually it should be easily done. So you don't need to rewrite the sentence a lot. Yeah, normally you just put it where it belongs, more or less, yeah, and then it should work. So misplaced modifier, as I said, like all other modifiers, it can be a word, phrase, a clause, and it's just in the incorrect position. Incorrect to the word which it modifies. So you should always think, if you're using a modifying phrase or modifying word, you ask yourself, what does it modify? Is it near it or is it far away in a sentence? So if it's in the wrong place, sometimes it still works, like with the example with the first example, minister was chatting with women. right? The phrase can exist, but then it's maybe a little bit awkward and maybe funny. Sometimes it's just in the wrong place. And sometimes correctness depends simply on the aim of the writer. So you as a writer can decide where to put it. Sometimes some words can move along the sentence easily. For example, let's look at this sentence. Professor Smith was picked to open the conference. Let's imagine we want to put the word just. It's a modifier. Yeah, where would you put it? Was just picked. Okay. Can it be in any other position in a sentence? To just open, or just to open just the conference, by the way. So not all other events, but just the conference. Can it be just Professor Smith at the very beginning? Why not? Yeah. So just like only Professor Smith was picked to open the conference. So you see that here, one word, it migrates along the sentence, and then you, as a writer, decide where to put it. Of course, you need to think about grammar, because it doesn't work with all the words. Sometimes you need to follow grammar rules and parts of speech. Just here can really migrate. So for example, if you say just Professor Smith, it means only Professor Smith, right? If you say Professor Smith was just picked to open the conference, well, then it means that Professor Smith was picked now. He was just picked, so maybe even yesterday we didn't know about it, right? But now we know. Professor Smith was picked to open just the conference. This one maybe sounds strange, but technically it might exist. So good news for you as writers here, you decide where to put it. And double check in your writings that you put the word that you mean to put in the correct position, so it modifies what you need. Now we're looking back at our wrong sentences, right? And I will ask you to correct them. By the way, depending on where it goes, you would be thinking about punctuation, of course. Do you need a comma, or you do not need a comma? But that's a different story a little bit. The first one. The minister chatted informally with several women about the cost of living. It makes sense to put with several women after informally. You can't put it after chatted straight away, right? Because then informally would be in a wrong position. He chatted informally, first how, then with whom? With several women, and then about whatever, right? Then, with the second one, yeah, you were suggesting after the word child. Let's see. The doctor gave the small child crying on the examination table his vaccine. Yeah. So that would be characteristic of a child, and it should follow the noun, right? So you will have to place it in the middle of the sentence. As for commas, you might put them or not, depending whether it's defining or non-defining relative clause, right? So depending on whether it's an important part of a sentence that he's crying on the examination table or not. But we don't talk much about punctuation today, but I just wanted to mention it, that you might need to be thinking about it in your writings. And finally, everyone watched the head of the chair, dressed in a tuxedo, enter the room. Here, I decided that dressed in a tuxedo would be non-defining relative clause. So it's not super important. It can be eliminated from the sentence. So we put commas around it. Okay. With a child crying on examination table, it is defining clause, so no commas. A little bit more about misplaced modifiers. Misplaced modifier can be an adjective. We've seen this. An adverb. It could be a phrase. in brackets, I just remind what a phrase is, how it's different from a clause, and it can be a clause. So a phrase, right, it's not a complete idea with subject and verb. For example, a prepositional phrase. Clause, it's a part of a sentence, and it has a subject and predicate. And whether it's dependent or independent clause, it can be, it can exist on its own or not. But yeah, clause, it's part of a sentence. Let's have a look. There are some examples on the left and A, B, C, D variants on the right. So I want you to try to identify what kind of misplaced modifier we have. And once again, you're looking for a misplaced modifier here, right? Not all modifiers in a sentence, because some of them can be correct. We just pick those that are wrong, misplaced. Let us check then. So number one would be B. That's an adverb. I will be highlighting this for you. The word slowly is in its wrong place, because here we calculated the results we had received slowly. Probably we were slowly calculating them, not receiving, right? So this is the adverb, which is put in a wrong place in a sentence. Number two, yes, and it is C. It's a phrase. Professor handed in a worksheet to the student covered in red ink. That's a phrase, and it looks like the student was all covered in red ink. Obviously, we're talking about a worksheet, right? Not the student. Torn, yes, thank you. That's an adjective. Torn student's book. Is it a torn student or it's a torn book, right? Of course, we may figure out what the author meant, but it's not exactly clear from the first reading. And the last one, right, that would be D, it's a clause. That the students enjoyed. What's wrong with the last one? Why it's misplaced? Were they enjoying the films or the class, right? And again, it might be both, but here, well, we suppose that it was a class, so it's in the wrong position then. Sometimes when you look at a sentence, you understand that this modifier can be for two things, but then a reader keeps asking, what did the author mean, right? So again, we need to make sure that we put it in a position where it's non-ambiguous. We don't need extra ambiguity, especially in academic writings, right? It should be non-ambiguous, unambiguous. So let's correct these phrases. We slowly calculated the results. Yeah, obviously, we slowly calculated the results we had received. The professor handed in a worksheet all covered in red ink to the student. Right. The student's torn book, absolutely. And the last one, Professor Jones taught a class that the students enjoyed on modern films. Possible, maybe, we can even revise the sentence, make it less heavy, and just paraphrase it. It's also possible. Sometimes when you feel it's not working just to change the position, you may be picking another strategy, just rewriting a sentence. So the students enjoyed Professor Jones's class on modern films. You have the same idea, but you make it a more, precise, clear, maybe even shorter. That's also a way to avoid misplaced modifiers. Here, my aim is to raise your awareness so you start noticing these things. The more examples you see, the better you become at noticing. Next step. So we gave old clothes that something to a local charity, right? Then number two, a watch had a solar clock, right? So I got a watch that has a solar clock for my graduation. So you move it closer to the word it modifies. The same here. in number 3, that Smith had given to Jones does not modify attic, but it modifies photograph, so it goes after it. Number 4, we modify the word grass, right? Number 5, the terrified patient who had a terminal disease. You see in the group where we discussed punctuation, here they do not suggest any commas. So again, you might think that they are necessary or not, but that would depend on your message. A pen that contained orange ink. This modifies pen, obviously. Who cheated on the test? That modifies student. And Marion, who was speeding, received a ticket. Well, that's it. So that was about misplaced modifiers, and here is the picture. So when you misplace, it actually should be right, more like this way: ice cream on the top and cone at the bottom. So that's my metaphor. Now let's look at these examples. 4 examples. Look at them. Tell me whether you feel they are okay or not. And so what unites these phrases? How are they similar? You need to either change the sentence, or you need a subject, a person who did it, who performed the spell check, and maybe passive voice will turn into active. Performing the spell check, I found many errors. So we've looked at these sentences. How would you call them? That's a dangling modifier. So it's, what is it? Dangling modifiers usually introduce, again, sentences or some phrases. They always have some verb. And this verb implies, right, kind of, we suppose that there is a subject. It implies this subject, but it doesn't name it. Like in our example with these errors, we imply that someone performed the spell check, but we don't know who. Subject is not mentioned. And when this subject is not mentioned, or when it's not the same as in the next sentence, in the next clause, then this modifier is dangling. Dangling means it's like in the air, you know, it's not connected to the rest of the sentence. So I chose this picture of a carrot just to show you that, you know, it's in the middle of nowhere, but it should refer to something. Okay, so 2 more things about dangling modifiers, and then we'll try to correct those. Dangling modifier is not as easy to correct as misplaced. Misplaced, we saw it before, it's just in the wrong position. So you move it along the sentence and then it becomes easier and clearer, right? Dangling modifier needs more, well, effort, I would say. Usually dangling modifiers appear at the beginning of the sentence. We've seen all of them now at the beginning of the sentence. That's the most common thing. But as you said, what if I put it at the end? You can put it at the end. It still will be dangling there. So still doesn't change much. So the same sentences that you've just seen, 4 of them, let's decide which of those have a dangling word, which of them have a dangling phrase, and which of them which has a dangling elliptical clause. Elliptical, it means that there was a clause, or it should be a full clause, but some parts are missing. So we just left them out of the sentence. So A would be 2, that's a dangling word. B would be 3 and 4. So what do we see? We see a gerund phrase, which starts, and then infinitive phrase, right? That starts the sentence. Both are, they're not connected to the subject who is doing this. And number 1 is dangling elliptical clause. Why is it elliptical? Because it's a clause, right? Dependent clause. And in its full form, while, for example, we were analyzing the results of the test, the participants finished this survey. So something is missing from the full clause. That's why it's called elliptical clause. You can simply call it a clause. Anyway, it's still dangling because we don't know who is doing it. Okay? So you see that dangling modifiers have different forms and shapes. But now let's talk what to do with that. How to spot and correct dangling modifier. 3 steps. First, I'll show with ing. Example, it could be different, but ing is classical. You're looking for this ing modifier at the beginning of the sentence. Here, not having studied the lab manual carefully, the experiment was a failure. So what do we see? We see that not having studied the lab manual carefully, someone studied, but we don't know who, right? So it's dangling. Then we ask ourselves, which noun follows this modifier? What does it modify? It should be the nearest noun. It's the word experiment. Then we ask ourselves, do they actually match? Can we use this modifier for this noun? Well, obviously not, right? So if they logically go together, good for you, you made no mistake. If the modifier and the noun do not go together logically, you have to do something with this, right? So what are the correction rules? This is your step 3. When you noticed everything, there are 2 ways to do it when you identify this dangling modifier. First way, you rewrite the sentence and you add a subject to the second part. Like this is our example. You rewrite like this. Not having studied the lab manual carefully, you add who, the subject. We failed the experiment. So, of course, you need to change the construction then. And you introduce a new subject. It could be we, it could be maybe something else that, well, that depends, right? The second way to correct a dangling modifier is when you take the modifier itself, the phrase, and you transform it into a subordinate clause. And you obviously add also subject and verb, like this. Not just not having studied the lab manual carefully, but you say, as we haven't studied the lab manual carefully, the experiment was a failure. So we add who did it in the modifier. So we change modifier into a clause. Which one looks easier or more logical way, A or B? Again, good news is now we are transforming, we're correcting sentences. When you write yourself, it's absolutely your choice to decide, do you need a shorter, longer sentence? Do you need modifier or not? Maybe you will not use any modifiers, or you will be thinking of a construction of a sentence from the beginning, right? And of course, you don't need to have long sentences if you are, if you need to do this word count, right? So of course, it's up to you. Now, coming back to our 4 sentences, I will ask you to change them. You can use variant A or variant B. It doesn't matter, the one you feel more like natural. Okay, shall we look at the variants? So with number 1, while we were analyzing the results of the test, the participants finished the survey. Number 2, proudly, the professor made the report. Honestly, we don't know who was making the report. Was it a professor? Was it a student? Well, like, what was happening? So here, it's again out of the context, we assume. So here the word professor was added. So proudly, the professor made the report. The professor was proud. Great. Here, performing the spell check, we found many errors. That's one way to do it. You are suggesting during the spell check, many errors were found. Possible, yeah? And the last one, to win the spelling bee, we should convince Lewis and Jared to join our team. Possible. What do I have? I have this one. If we want to win the spelling bee this year, Lewis and Jared should join our team. Yeah, looks good to me as well. Then it's clear that we want to win, the team, and these guys can help us do this. So that's why they should join the team, right? Correction rules. Remember, we said that there are basically, if you're not rewriting fully, there are 2 correction rules. First, you take this sentence and you add a subject to the second part. Here we add we. We is a subject. It wasn't there, but we add it, and so sentence looks okay. Variant B, what you do? You change the dangling modifier into subordinate clause. So what we see here, as we haven't studied, so you change modifier into subordinate clause. These 2 strategies are usually the most common of, well, strategies of correction. So I'm asking you, which strategy was used in these examples? Strategy A, when you add a subject to the second part of the sentence. So which ones would be this? Points A would be number 2 and 3. Let's analyze it. Proudly, we don't change. We just leave it as it is. But what we do, we add a subject, professor, and then it goes together with the verb. Professor made the report. Subject wasn't there, so we add it. Now the sentence looks okay. The same with number 3. Performing the spell check, modifier is the same. What do we add? We add subject, we. We did what? We found. One strategy. Strategy B, you take a modifier and you transform it into a full clause with subject and predicate, and now this is a good, normal, yeah, clear clause. In number 4, it's a conditional clause with if. We just decided to do it this way. If we want to win, something, something. So these are the 2 strategies we normally use. Of course, you can completely rewrite the sentence. It's up to you as well. You can just do it from scratch. But if you look at your writing and you like your sentence, but you feel that probably there is a dangling modifier, what can I do with this? Either add a subject or change sentence into subordinate clause. So we discussed dangling modifiers. Let's sum it up. So what do we see? We see that dangling modifiers usually start with the gerund phrase at the beginning. So doing something, something else was happening. And that's where mistake comes from, right? Gerund phrase. We can start with an infinitive phrase. To do something, something else should happen, right? Often dangling modifier starts with while or by, while doing or by doing something, something else was happening. And again, this is where mistakes often appear. And like with our example, proudly, something, something. This can also be an adverb of manner at the beginning of a sentence. So what I want you to think now, think about your area, like your area of expertise, your professional area, right? What kind of sentences might appear like with mistakes with dangling modifiers? Can you think of wrong examples now? Imagine you're writing, I don't know, an article now. Imagine a wrong sentence. Use any of the models on the slide, okay? Now, let's quickly look at squinting modifiers. That's the easiest one. It's the last picture we had, right? So squinting modifiers confuse the meaning of a sentence because they appear to modify the words that come both before and after. So let's look at this sentence. The professor is admitting students on Monday morning only in his office. So only on Monday morning or only in his office. So if you have a sentence like this, it's not that bad, but you can't know exactly what reader will think. Some readers will think about option 1, some readers will think about option 2, and you need to be more specific. So squinting modifiers are also easy to correct because you put modifier in the position where it should be. For example, the professor is admitting students only on Monday morning in his office, or professor is admitting students on Monday morning in his office only, right? So you don't go to his to the classroom or something, you go only to his office. This mistake can happen accidentally, right? You just maybe didn't think about it, and then suddenly the word is in between and you don't know where it belongs. So let's look at these sentences. The student who answered quickly ran out of breath. So the question is, did he answer quickly or did he quickly run out of breath? That's the question. Oh, I actually have both variants. The student who quickly, the student who quickly answered ran out of breath, or the student who answered ran out of breath, ran quickly out of breath, or actually it could be ran out of breath quickly. It could be to the very end, also possible here. Ran out of breath quickly, also like this, okay? The same with the second one. Students who came late often escaped punishment. Did the students come late often? Or do they escape punishment often? And again, this leads us to two different sentences. Either students, like often students who came late escaped punishment, or students who often came late escaped punishment. So this one, it's only about being like noticing, being careful, okay, with where you put these modifiers. Okay, to finish with this, I give you 6 sentences. We have different modifier problems here. Dangling, like a carrot, remember? Misplaced, like where you have the ice cream metaphor, which is upside down. And we have squinting modifiers, where they characterize both. Could you please identify which is which? Let's slowly start checking, and then I will ask you to correct them. Okay, these data only provide a partial answer. Well, this is considered a misplaced modifier. I think actually only belongs not to the word that it's near to. It's not about provide, it's not about data. Only refers to partial answer. And that's why it's considered misplaced, because it's in the wrong part of the sentence. Then number 2 is dangling. We see quite common gerund with a preposition at the beginning. Then number 3, dangling as well. Number 4, and it's misplaced. I think, no, it's still, I mean, it's a part of grammar here. So even if you understand from the context, it's still considered a dangling modifier. Sometimes it could be really ambiguous, sometimes not, but it's still recommended to correct those. Okay, let us quickly correct these sentences. These data only provide a partial answer. To me, it sounds more logical, да, что данные дают только частичный ответ, so we can't rely on these data fully. What about number 2? After separating participants in groups, we tested group A. Remember, we said that this is a dangling modifier. One of the ways is to add a subject, right? So this is what we do. Or you can say, after we separated participants into groups, group A was tested, also possible. Number 3, the participants were tested using this procedure. We discussed it. So again, say who did it, right? Mm-hmm. And here I put it at the beginning because, as we said, yeah, it's more natural. As for number 4, it's a long one. What can we do? We can put only, I guess here only belongs to 1.3 errors, right? And it's misplaced. It's not only a mean, but of only this. Number 5, the investigator tested the subjects using this procedure. Of course, you can do this. The investigator, using this procedure, tested the subjects. And based on this assumption, we developed a model. On the basis of this assumption, because if you say based, who was based? We don't know. So here it makes sense just to rewrite the whole thing. So to finish with this, you will get the presentation. There will be some references. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure working with you. Nice audience.
Thank you, Ekaterina. Thank you, everyone. And please come to our next workshop. Visit our website to find out more and register.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.